Good day, my name is Lorena Erica L. Urilla. This is my report about taxing powers, nature of the power of taxation of LGUs. It is already well settled that although the power to tax is inherent in the state, the same is not true for the LGUs to whom that the power must be delegated by Congress and must be exercised within the guidelines and limitations that Congress may provide. ARMM's taxing power. The ARMM has the legislative power to create sources of revenues within its territorial jurisdiction that subject to the provision of the 1987 Constitution and national laws. Ito ay makikita po yan sa Article 10, Section 20. Taking the resulting sum into consideration, it is apparent that what Congress did in this instant was not to include or exclude the authority to levy amusement taxes from the taxing power of the covered LGUs, but to earmark, if not altogether confiscate, the income to be received by LGU from the taxpayer in favor of and for transmittal to FDCP. Instead of the taxing authority, this is in clear contravention of the constitutional command that taxes levied by LGUs shall accrue exclusively to said LGU and is repugnant to the power of LGUs to apportion the resources in line with their priorities. It is basic precept that the inherent legislative power of Congress, board as may be, are limited and confined within the four walls of the Constitution. Accordingly, whether the legislator exercises its power, enact, amend, and repeal laws, it should do so without going beyond the parameters wrote by the organic law. In the case at bar, through the application of enforcement of Section 14 of RA 1967, the income from the amusement taxes levied by the covered LGUs did not and will under no circumstance accrue to them, not even partially, despite being the taxing authority. Therefore, Congress clearly overstepped its plenary legislative power. The amendment being violated of the fundamental laws guarantee on local authority or autonomy. Main sources of revenues of LGUs. Number 1 is taxes, fees, and charges. Ito ay makikita sa 1987 Constitution, Article 10, Section 5. Internal Revenue Allotment or IRA or IRA, just shared in the national taxes which shall be automatically released to them. Makikita naman ito sa Section 6 sa Article 10. The phrase National Internal Revenue Taxes engrafted in Section 284 is undoubtedly more restrictive than the term national taxes written in Section 6, such as Congress shall actually departed from the letter of the 1987 Constitution stating that national taxes should be the base from which the just share of LGU comes. Such departure is impermissible. It is clear from the foregoing clarification that the exclusion of the other national taxes like customs duties from the base of determining the just share of the LGUs contravene the express constitutional edict in Section 6, Article 10, the 1987 Constitution. Number 3, equitable share in the proceeds of the utilization development of the national wealth within their areas. Yan ay makikita naman po ay sa Section 7, Article 10. Principles governing exercise of taxing and revenue sharing powers of LGUs. Ang number 1 naman po dito ay taxation shall be uniform in its LGUs. And number 2, taxes, fees, charges, and other impositions shall be equitable and based as far as practicable on the taxpayer's ability to pay. It shall be levied and collected only for public purpose, or it must not be unjust, excessive, oppressive, or confiscatory. It must not be contrary to law, public policy, national economic policy, or restraint of trade. Number 3, the collection of local taxes, fees, charges, and other imposition shall in no case be let to any private person. Number 4, the revenue collected shall inure solely to the benefit of and to be subject to disposition by the local government unit unless specifically provided therein. And number 5, its local government unit shall, as far as practicable, evolve a progressive system of taxation. Principle governing financial affairs, transaction, and operations of LGU. No money shall be paid out of the local treasury except in pursuant of an appropriation ordinance or law. Local government funds and money shall be spent solely for public purposes. Local revenue is generated only from sources expressly authorized by law or ordinance, and collection thereof shall at all times be acknowledged properly. All monies officially received by a local government officer in any capacity on any occasion shall be accounted for a local fund unless otherwise provided. Wait lang. Yan. Kasunod naman po ay trust funds in the local treasury shall not be paid out except in the fulfillment of the purpose for which the trust can created or the fund received. Every officer of LGU whose duties permit or require the possession or custody of local funds shall be properly bounded, and such officer shall be accountable and responsible for said fund and for the safekeeping thereof in conformity with the provision of law. Local governments shall formulated sound financial plans, and local budgets shall be based on function, activities, and projects in terms of expected result. Local budget plans and goals shall, as far as practicable, be harmonized with national government plans, goals, and strategies in order to optimize the utilization of resources and to avoid duplication in the use of fiscal and physical resources. Local budgets shall operationalize approved local development plans, and LGUs shall ensure that their respective budgets incorporate the requirements of their component unit and provide for equitable allocation of resourcing among these component unit. National planning shall be based on local planning to ensure that the needs and aspirations of the people, as articulated by the LGUs in their respective local development plans, are considered in the formulation of budget of national line agencies or offices. And fiscal responsibility shall be shared by all those exercising authority over the financial affairs, transactions, and operation of LGUs, and the LGU shall invader to have a balanced budget in each fiscal years of operation. Andito naman po yung requirements for a valid tax ordinance. Number 1 is the tax is for a public purpose. Number 2, the rule on uniformity of taxation is observed. Number 3, either the person or property tax is within the jurisdiction of the government levying the tax. And number 4, in the assessment and collection of certain kinds of taxes, notice and opportunity for hearing are provided. Kasunod po ay procedural requirements for a valid revenue ordinance. Number 1, a prior public hearing on a measure to be conducted according to the prescribed rules. And number 2, publication of the tax ordinance within 10 days after the approval for 3 consecutive days in a newspaper of local circulation, provided that in provinces, cities, and municipalities where there are no newspapers of local circulation, the same may be posted in at least 2 conspicuous and publicly accessible places. Effectivity of tax ordinance. In case the effectivity of tax ordinance or revenue measure falls on any date other than the beginning of the quarter, the same shall be considered as falling at the beginning of the next ensuing quarter, and the taxes, fees, or charges due shall begin to accrue therefrom. Authority to determine the legality or property of the local tax ordinance or revenue measured. It is the Secretary of Justice who shall determine questions on the legality and constitutionality of ordinance or revenue measures. Such questions shall be raised on appeal within 30 days from the effectivity thereof to the Secretary of Justice, who shall render a decision within 60 days from the date of receipt of the appeal. Tax protest. The formal statement, usually in writing, made by a person who is called upon the public authority to pay a sum of money, in which he declares that he does not concede the legality or justice of the claim of his duty to pay it, or that he disputes the amount demanded, the object being to save his right to recover or reclaim the amount, which right would be lost by his acquiescence. Thus, taxes may be paid under protest. Requisites of a valid tax protest in a LGU or PAP. Number 1, taxpayer must pay the taxes. Number 2, there shall be annotation on the tax receipt the word paid under protest. The protest in writing must be filed within 30 days from payment of the tax to the provincial, city treasurer, or municipal treasurer. In the case of municipality within Metropolitan Manila area, who shall decide the protest within 60 days from receipt. Remedies available to the LGUs to enforce the payment of taxes. Number 1, imposing penalties, surcharges, and penalty interest in case of the delinquency. Number 2, availing local government liens. Yan nakikita sa section 173. Number 3, administrative action through distraint of goods, chattels, and other personal property. And number 4 ay judicial action. Community tax. Community tax is a poll or capitation tax which is imposed upon person who reside within a specified territory, excepted from the payment of community tax. Number 1 is diplomatic and circular representatives. And number 2, transit visitors with when they stay in the Philippines does not exceed 3 months. Real property taxes. These are directly imposed on privilege to use real property such as land, building, machinery, and other improvements unless specifically accepted. The term exclusive of the franchise is interpreted on means properties actually, directly, and exclusively used in the radio and telecommunications business. The subsequent piece of legislation which reiterated the phrase exclusive of this franchise found in the previous tax exception grant to the company is an express and real intention on the part of the Congress to once again remove from the LGC's delegated taxing power all of the company's properties that are actually directly and exclusively used in the pursuit of its franchise. Elements so that the president may interfere in a local fiscal matter. Number 1, an unmanaged public sector deficit of the national government. Number 2, consultations with the presiding officers of the Senate and the House of Representatives and the president of the various local leagues. Number 3, and the corresponding recommendation of the secretaries of the Department of Finance, Interior, and Local Government and Budget and Management. Legislative power, nature of local legislative powers. It is fundamental principle that municipal ordinances are inferior in status and subordinate to the laws of the state. An ordinance is complex with a state of law of general character and statewide application is universally held to be invalid. In every power to pass ordinance given to a municipality, there is an implied restriction that the ordinances shall be consistent with the general law. The Sanggunian. A Sanggunian is a collegial body. Legislation, which is the principal function of the Sanggunian, requires the participation of all its members so that they may not only represent the interests of their respective constituents but also help in the making of decision by voting upon every question put upon the body. No power to subpoena and hold person in contempt. The contempt power and the subpoena powers cannot be deemed implied in the delegation of certain legislative function to local legislative bodies. This cannot be presumed to exist in a favor of the latter and must be considered in exception to Section 4 of BP Blog 3 bilang 337, which provides for liberal rules of interpretation in favor of local autonomy. Pakiayos na lang po, feeling ko mali yung basa ko dun sa BLG. And since the existence of this power poses a potential derogation of individual rights, the law cannot be liberally construed to have impliedly granted such power to local legislative bodies. The intention of the people, through their representatives, to share this power with the local legislative bodies must clearly appear in pertinent legislation. Local legislative bodies and their presiding officer. Sa province, merong sangguniang palalawigan, mayroong vice governor. Sa bayan or city, sangguniang panlungsod. Ito ay ang vice mayor. Municipality, sangguniang bayan, municipal ay vice mayor. Barangay, Sangguniang Barangay, Punong Barangay. In the absence of the regular presiding officer on his inability to preside the Sangguniang session, the member present and constituting a quorum shall elect from among themselves a temporary presiding officer. The creation of temporary vacancy in the office of governor. A governor creates a corresponding temporary vacancy in the office of vice governor whenever the latter act as governor by virtue as temporary vacancy. The continuity of the acting governor, vice governor, power as presiding officer of the SP is suspended so long as he is in such capacity. Nabasa na natin to kanina. Quorum in the Sanggunian. Quorum is defined as the number of members of a body which, when legally assembled in the proper places, will enable the body to transact its proper business, or the number which make a lawful body and give its power pass upon a law, ordinance, or any valid act. Majority, when required to constitute a quorum, means the number greater than half or more than half of any total. Relative thereto, Section 53 of the Local Government Code of 1991 provides that a majority of all the members of the Sangguniang who had been elected and qualified shall constitute a quorum to conduct official business. Majority has been defined in Santiago versus Gingodna. That width is greater than half of the member of the body. Following the said ruling, since the total membership of the Sanggunian being 11 divided by 2 give us a quotient of 5.5. Let it be noted, however, one whole vote, since it physically and legally impossible to divide a person or even his vote into a fractional part. Accordingly, we have to give up the next whole number, which is 6. Excuse me po. In this regard, 6 is more than 5.5 and therefore more than one half of the total membership of Sangguniang Bayan is conformity with the jurisprudential definition of the term majority. Excuse me po. Excuse me. Pasensya na po. The presence of 6 members shall already constitute a quorum in the Sangguniang Bayan for it to conduct official session. Procedures to be taken by presiding officer if there is a question on quorum. Should there be a question of quorum raised during a session, the presiding officer shall immediately proceed to call the roll of member and announce the result. The presiding officer may be declares a recess until such time that quorum is constituted. Compel immediate attendance of the number who are absent without justifiable cause. And number 3, declare the session adjourned for lack of quorum, and no business shall be transacted if there is still no quorum despite enforcement of attendance. Fixing of session. Regular sessions by resolution on the first day of the session immediately following the election of its member. And last, special sessions when public interest so demand. Special session may be called for by the chief executive or by a majority vote members of Sanggunian. Ito lamang po at maraming salamat po sa inyo.